Chapter 2. My new friend becomes the planet's new enemy. I saw her from behind, a head of maple-colored hair that reeked in a good way of Siamo and Koho, two of my favorite things, all intricately braided into 3 braids. Each of them had 4 glowing red bands, equally spaced from each other, which separated the length of her braids into 3 knots, before being tied off with a blue ribbon. The red and blue signified she was a Cybogurian. She wore silver armor, a chestplate etched in white with designs of eyes, a shimmering white skirt that went to her knees, black combat boots that covered her shins, and silver gauntlets that ran from her wrists to her elbows. At first I thought she'd taken the blade from me, but a slight change of view and the overcoming of my immediate shock revealed that she had actually produced a shield made of pure blue energy. She spoke, but it was in her native language.
Likabe,
She said, The dark figure snarled. The dark warrior looked at me when he said that last thing. This is what the conversation translated as.
leave him be. You have no right to mess with him or the Kaydonians.
How dare you interrupt? This fight is between me and him.
Him?
She asked, in English this time.
He's not much more than a child.
A child
The dark warrior said, also in English.
who is associated with the very people whom I am ordered to kill.
I was about to say something, but something stopped me. I heard a voice in my head. Not the conscious type voice, but the voice of another person.
Warrior,
It said.
please leave while you can.
I realized it was the new person's voice. I can't, I thought in response. It won't let me.
He will with me here.
I jetted away. Just like before, the dark warrior materialized in front of me. Shortly after, my new ally materialized next to me.
Okay,
She said out loud.
I'll agree that he seems to be completely focused on you.
By that logic, I said, he won't leave me alone until we win, or until he kills me first.
So allow me to assist you.
I thought about it. Actually, I said, I think I have a plan. As we stood looking at the dark warrior, the only thing that went through my mind was, I should hurry up and do this before I change my mind. With me and the female warrior at a standoff with the dark warrior, I felt a slight shift in tension. I charged, and the dark warrior did the same, only the female warrior stayed behind. Our blades clashed, and tendrils of energy flew. I knew he wanted to take another strike, but I kept him at bay with all but sheer willpower and endurance, which increased my temperatures drastically. This was Phase 1. Phase 2 was not as easy. I had to spin him so that his back was to the female warrior. I began to shift, turning in such a subtle way that he didn't notice. It took forever, and most of my strength, but I finally shifted his position. You ready? I thought to my ally.
Indeed.
Came her response. And with that I began the final phase, which was the hardest. With what concentration I had left, I concentrated on pulling my power into my hands and forearms. Very quickly I dashed back and thrusted my hands forward, which then proceeded to emit a concentrated beam of energy. The overall force of the blast was nowhere near enough to deal any real damage, at least not to him, but it was enough to knock him back to where my ally was waiting, who then thrusted her blade straight through his chest. I didn't examine the blade up close the first time I saw it, but I realized it was a custom design. It was shaped like an eye. Its victim began to fade, uttering one more phrase before evaporating completely. He exhaled. You will suffer for this. I didn't know who he was talking to, and at that point I didn't care. I had other things on my mind. The first was how tired I was. The second was who my ally was.
I guess I was wrong.
She said with a look of respect.
You are more than just a child.
You're a forger. I never had much love for the forges. It showed a little more than I wanted.
Yes.
She laughed, surprising me.
And I can see that you don't particularly like that.
It's nothing against you, I said. Just the owner, I guess.
Many could understand that. Off the record, she is shallow and vain.
She wanted to recruit me.
Ah.
My mom told me that she'd upgrade me with parts I didn't need, but she didn't dare take them out.
Which explains your dislike of forgers?
Well, not all forgers, I chuckled. Salse ya yupa, by the way. I am a Sikianius Pax, I said.
Eso se saya bayo.
She replied. I am Spielsa Panos, she said.
You're tough,
She said.
I like that.
Well, I said, you can only be so weak with so many practice fights.
Okay, Mr. Tough Guy.
I almost blushed when she laughed. We should head back down, I said. Sadelfa needs to know what just happened.
Agreed.
She replied. On our way down, I began to contemplate what I'd just witnessed, what I had just participated in. That warrior had targeted me out of all of Spielsaim's inhabitants. If he had been targeting me, who else was? I decided that part of my discussion with my dad would have to be why that would be. When we touched down, we were immediately surrounded by the police force known as the Enforcement Guards.
Freeze!
One yelled.
You're under arrest.
Hey! I yelled as one pushed me aside. What's the deal?
Stand aside, civilian. Spielsa Panos, you are under arrest by way of reasonable suspicion.
I looked at Spielsa. She looked at me, and then back to the guards.
On whose suspicion?
Spielsa asked.
My suspicion,
Said a new voice, one that sounded very familiar, one I hadn't heard for hundreds of seons. Spielsa could only be shocked, and I understood why. The owner of the voice emerged from the crowd. She was tall, wearing a brown blouse. I hated her.
Mistress?
Spielsa asked with rightful confusion. You, I growled. I was so angry I began to see red.
Yes, me.
The new figure said.
Pandorianius, the sword divinitus.
I never had a worse feeling of dread and rage than right now.
As for my suspicions,
She started.
I am entitled to them, for they are reasonably true.
It was silent for a count of 3. Normally you don't question immortal deities, but I was so mad I didn't bother to defect to the rules. And how, exactly, I began, are they true?
This traitor
The divinitist spat.
you call friend is the enemy.
I didn't think I heard her correctly. What?
You heard me. She is the enemy.
How can that possibly be true?
I'll answer your question
The divinitist said, moving uncomfortably close.
with one of my own.
My anger was rising even more now. Everything I saw became red scale. What question? I asked slowly, keeping my voice as level as possible.
How exactly?
The sword divinitist began.
Does she know when the enemy will show up, or where they'll be on the planet for that matter?
My immature thought was, that was 2 questions. But then Spielsa tried to speak.
Mistress,
She began.
if I may explain—
Silence!
Snapped the divinitist. Spielsa cringed away.
I won't have any more of your treacherous words.
I was really mad now, and it got to the point where I couldn't see anything but the color red. Forget my near-boiling internal temperatures, I was about to snap.
Guards,
The divinitist yelled.
seize her.
I was off.
No,
I snarled.
say ahí.
My rage immediately detonated. All I could remember was roaring. In that one instant, I couldn't hear anything, save for the thrum of my own life force and a very large bang. My vision shifted from red to white, then from white to normal. When that happened, I saw the guards, who were about to swarm Spielsa, were on their backs, smoking. When I saw their faces, they all looked and sounded genuinely scared. I couldn't hear exactly what was said by each guard, but I could make out fragmented sentences.
Red flash.
One said.
His eyes.
Said another. These kinds of fragmented sentences continued, but then I heard one phrase that caught my attention. The sword divinitist didn't look hurt, but she hadn't been spared from the smoking plague, for her clothes were shredded, and she was covered in burns. She was tending to one guard who, when he saw me, shouted,
By Timo, Kawe
By Trimus, he went Regius. Regius. I knew that to be a form taken on by the Getaichi, the generational tribe species. Some had it as an attribute, others had it incorporated into their very being, but those guys dated back to the Sane Kyoe, the first encounter. Even so, if one wanted to achieve such a form now, they would have to train intensively or, even harder and rarer, be a descendant of one of the Getaichi. I knew for a fact that I didn't train for Regius, and I certainly wasn't a Getaichi descendant. Regius. The thought made my head swim. I almost missed what the sword divinitist said.
Seize them both,
She said.
They are to be detained until further sentencing.
No,
Cried Spielsa.
he's just...
Just a child? You and I both know that is not true.
It doesn't matter what I am, I said. I may not be the enemy, but I will thrash anyone who insists otherwise. I hope that doesn't include family, said a new voice. I looked up and smiled. Hovering above us, I saw the smooth and shining red and golden armor of my father, Sedalfa Tryon. I knew my father would set this straight. I looked over at Spielsa, thinking she had the same thought, but my smile melted when I saw her face. She was still looking at my father, but on her face was a look of absolute terror. She looked on the verge of tears. Sedalfa never struck me as scary, except for when he's angry, which he wasn't now. At least he didn't look it. The only reason that justified Spielsa's fear was the reason for Sedalfa's being here. "Hey, Dad," I said when he touched down. "What's up, buddy boy?" said Sedalfa. Like I said before, Sedalfa was not a scary person, but the reason he's feared is because of his status. He serves on Tekoze tribe with 2 other members, Vortex and Nucleus Prieston, both of whom are very formal. Sedalfa, despite his authority, is just the opposite. He's very lax compared to his comrades, and even more so toward me and my brother Isionis. This is why he doesn't care how I address him. Normally I would address him as father when in public and around others, or when I was alone and angry. Otherwise I would call him Dad or Sedalfa. Calling him Dad in public indicated that something was wrong. "What's going on?" Sedalfa asked. I started to speak, but the sword divinitist beat me to it.
What's going on,
She began.
is the investigation of a possible conspiracy.
"Between who?" Sedalfa asked.
My original suspicions were founded on conspiracy between the enemy and her.
She gestured to Spielsa.
But now I wonder if your buddy boy is involved as well.
Sedalfa looked about as confused as I was angry, which was a lot. He looked at me in askance. "She believes," I began, "that Spielsa is working for the enemy just because she happens to know when all the attacks are happening." Sedalfa's face softened to reveal clarity. "And how does my son wind up in all this?" he asked.
Co-conspirators
Said the sword divinitist.
defend and work with each other, do they not?
"Under any other circumstances, I would be inclined to agree with you. But as Sikianius is personable to anyone he deems friendly, to suggest that he would use that for heinous purposes is more than a stretch. Given your rather attentive involvement in his developing, I feel you know this as well." Pendurianius seemed to ponder this.
Very well.
She said after a few moments. I started to relax, but I did so too soon.
However,
She said, turning to Spielsa.
there is no evidence pointed in your favor.
Sedalfa closed his eyes and sighed through his nose, the way he did whenever he was about to make a decision he really didn't want to make. "Pendurianius," Sedalfa tried, "please consider."
You are dangerously close to invoking my wrath, Tryon.
Sedalfa became silent.
Mistress,
Spielsa cried. Glowing liquid blue protocords formed in her eyes.
I plead you hear me.
"No longer," the sword divinitist snarled.
Am I your mistress? Nor am I obligated to listen to your treacherous tongue any longer.
"Dad," I said, "this isn't right or fair." "I know, buddy," Sedalfa said. "Forgive me. Pendurianius, do as you feel necessary." No, I thought. I'd never go against my dad, but this just wasn't fair on any level. Not Pendurianius's, not Sedalfa's. I became mad, but not like before. It was more of a defensive anger. I felt a surge of energy, and I rushed in front of Spielsa, blue energy orbs in hand. This surprised everyone present. "Never," I growled, "would I ever go against my dad. But if you think I won't take you to save my friends, You are as mistaken as you are vain. The Divinitus was taken aback by the sudden verbal offense. I figured Sedalfa would too, but I snuck a glance and saw that from under his now crossed arms he was giving a thumb up.
You dare!
The Divinitus started. I do! This startled Pandorianius. So back up. Now!
No!
Spielsa said, pulling me back before I could chuck my energy.
I'll go.
But, I started, stopping only when I heard her voice in my head.
My friend,
She thought.
please do not make this into anything more than it has to be.
But it's not right, I thought back. You know that.
Yes, but you can only push a divine entity so far.
She got me there.
Your courage is admirable, as well as your persistence. Your attempted assistance is appreciated, but not everything can be helped.
You can't seriously be considering this. You can't let her do this.
I must. Trust me, it is better this way. Please do not try to convince me otherwise.
I was silent, both in my head and in reality. After a time, I thought, fine,
Thank you.
came her reply. But I want you to know, she won't get away with this. Not with me anyways. I'll be sure of that. And I will save you. I promise if it's the last thing I do on this planet. More silence before I heard chuckling in my head.
I have no doubt that you will try.
And I will succeed.
Thank you.
Our conversation ended. I moved aside, the energy in my hands dispersing. Anger and sadness flashed across my face as I looked at Sedalfa once more. He nodded as if to say, it has to be done. I sighed. Take her, I said in submission. The Divinitus smiled coldly and snapped her fingers. The previously downed guards suddenly sprung to their feet and swarmed Spielsa, who hardly fought back, cuffing her wrists and chaining her ankles with white electricity. Spielsa winced in pain but didn't cry out, something I knew she wanted to do.
Come,
the Divinitus said to the guards. They all but dragged Spielsa, who had stiffened from the pain and the literal shock she was experiencing, in the direction of the forges. I knew where she was headed, and it broke my heart to see her treated like that, even if I had known her for a few minutes.
I will forget that insult, child,
the Divinitus said as she passed me.
But I warn you, do not cross me again, or you will endure a fate worse than that traitor. Remember, I made you what you are, and gave you what you have. I had to fight the instinct to punch the Divinitus in the nose. After she left, Sedalfa tried talking to me. You okay, buddy? He asked. I nodded, but I was too angry to speak. How could he let her go like that? He was the planet's king. He could have done something. But he just let her go. I'm sorry, Sedalfa said. I still couldn't speak. I knew he meant it, but nothing could fix an injustice like that. I looked in the direction Spielsa was taken. She, along with her escorts, was already gone. Then I noticed something glowing blue in the dirt. I walked over and picked it up. It was a piece of crystalline protoquartz on a leather cord. I felt around it and found engravings on it. They translated as, You have a great destiny. May this shard protect you as it once did me. This is my gift to you.
It wasn't hard to figure out who the me was in that line. Buddy, Sedalfa asked behind me. You alright? My anger subsided enough for me to speak. Yeah, I said. I just have a mission now. Sedalfa seemed to understand immediately. He said with thought. Well, you know I'll always help you whenever you need it. Thanks, I said. I didn't know if she could hear me, but I thought to Spielsa anyways. One way or another, I began. Sooner or later, I'll free you. I didn't expect a reply, but as if in response I got a warm feeling in the back of my mind, as though despite her troubles, she were smiling. This doubled my sense of saving my friend. I didn't know it then, but after I picked up that shard, my mission had already begun. I won't say that I remember much of what I did after that day. From what I could remember, I spent most of my time training. With whom, I wouldn't have remembered, because every time I began to spar and got a bit too into it, I saw the sword Divinitus's face, and I grew more ferocious, and my sparring matches quickly became one-sided battles. I was glad that I never hurt anyone too badly, but it wasn't until I was older that I was able to keep myself in check. I would never know how much that would come in handy down the line.